Mexican cartels are basically giant corporations, with one caveat. They're dealing in illegal businesses. Huge illegal businesses that generate massive amounts of income. We're talking about billions of dollars a year, and things aren't slowing down for these cartels. In fact, business is growing and it's booming. Profits in recent years have been ever growing, and it totally makes sense because the population keeps growing. And if the percentage of people who are customers stays the same, that means the revenue grows. Cartel business isn't exactly an online business. Making the money is the relatively easy part for the cartels, since they can control that themselves. Almost all of the money that they get is money from the streets, assuming that they're controlling all the operations from top to bottom. But moving the cash and getting it into bank accounts is where things get tough. The cartels have to deal with a lot of money that aren't $100 bills. For example, $1 million alone in $5 bills would weigh well over 400 pounds. Moving the money physically into Mexico alone is a huge pain. While many small cartels take the risk of smuggling cash back to Mexico in bulk, more sophisticated cartels don't do that. The biggest ones have billions of dollars they have to deal with. Here's a quick crash course on money laundering. There are plenty of different ways to launder money, but they essentially boil down to two ways. The first method is laundering through a bank. The cartel will first deposit their money at a bank. Then, a process known as layering begins. The cartel will send the money through various wire transfers to a lot of different accounts. That means a lot of transfers to a lot of different names in a lot of different countries. The cartel will hire a veritable army of people to deposit small amounts of cash in banks all over the country, in cities large and small. They'll vary the amount of their deposits and withdrawals in order to make the paper trail way harder to follow in case anyone decides to check on anything. A lot of these people get caught anyways, but to the cartels, that's simply the cost of doing business. Once the money is back in the money system, it can now be used. But the biggest problem with this method is the $10,000 limit. You probably know that the IRS requires a bank to report any deposits over $10,000. With billions of dollars to launder, you can imagine how tedious that amount of money can get. It's almost impossible, unless you can get the bank in on it. The second method is laundering the money through what's called trade-based laundering. This was a technique El Chapo's cartel developed into an art form. The simplest way to do this is by buying easily sold high-end items, such as a Rolex or a gold bar from a legitimate company in the United States. Anything that's more like a commodity, the better. They then would sell the item back in Mexico for pesos. The more sophisticated method is actually owning legitimate cash-based businesses and laundering the money that way. A really quick example would be a restaurant. A lot of restaurants involved in money laundering are actually legitimate businesses, with real staff, a real menu, and real profits. The dirty money will be mixed in with the clean money. The dirty money is essentially explained with fake profits. You can't launder money through a business using anything that's traceable, so cartels are looking for a business with a lot of cash turnover. Cash isn't traceable, so any cash-intensive businesses are used to launder money. Laundromats, used car dealerships, and restaurants are some of the most popular businesses. For example, El Chapo's cartel laundered money through the Los Angeles fashion district. His cartel was exploiting the immigrant-heavy garment industry's relaxed attitude toward reporting large transactions. This allowed the cartel to buy clothes in large quantities and ship the clothes across the border, where they were sold for pesos. So if it's so tough to launder money, then how did the cartels get so big and powerful? Why isn't Mexico putting a stop to all of that? One word: corruption. There's a lot of corruption in the Mexican government. As a famous saying goes, people are forced to either accept the bribe or face the consequences. A lot of times, cartel members would show up at a place of business and ask them to do whatever it was they needed them to do. And of course, there would be a cash bribe placed on the table. But at the same time, cartel members would have already done their research. They would place pictures of that employee's family members on the table. A lot of people are put between a rock and a hard place. Corruption, forced or unforced in Mexico, has contributed to the domination of Mexican cartels. Beetle Bank was a bank used by the Sinaloa cartel, the one El Chapo ran. They're still the most powerful cartel in the world. Well, they needed a lot of money laundered, and doing it through a bank was one of their ways. And Beetle was the bank that El Chapo's cartel picked. A lot of money was coming and going from Beetle Bank, and in case you guys didn't know it, there were a lot of corrupt officials working at the bank. HSBC was looking for a larger presence in Mexico, and that's why in 2002, HSBC acquired Beetle Bank, which was the 5th largest bank in Mexico at the time. You'd expect that an international bank that operates across several continents and the largest bank in Europe would look into Beetle. And yes, HSBC did. They noticed lots of money flooding into Beetle Bank, and that was something HSBC wanted a piece of. Banks that are as big as HSBC do their due diligence. HSBC had their own rating system for determining how risky a banking culture was. Before they enter a market, they rate the banking system in that specific country. HSBC ranks the bank on several levels of risk, with the lowest level of risk being rated as standard, and the highest as high. For Beetle, HSBC somehow rated them as standard, the lowest level of risk. This was in spite of plenty of evidence that there could be large amounts of unmonitored cash that was flooding the bank. HSBC was advised to introduce high levels of control for bank transactions, but they stood by their choice that the level of risk was low in Mexico, contrary to the evidence. They made a conscious decision to not look closely at the transactions that were going on at the bank. HSBC bought a bank that was filled with cartel bank accounts, and we get it. When banks buy another bank, they want to maximize their profits. They were easily taking in hundreds of thousands of dollars a day from the cartel. To speed up the deposits, cartel members even designed specially shaped boxes that fit the size of teller windows at the HSBC branches. The lax money laundering controls at HSBC allowed two cartels, one each in Mexico and Colombia, to move $881 million through the bank in a little less than 5 years. That's just two cartels. HSBC grew to be known as the place to launder money in Mexico. Between 2007 and 2008, for example, HSBC Mexico shipped out roughly $7 billion to HSBC's US operation. That was more money than any other HSBC affiliates. Mexican and US authorities were extremely concerned back then that cartels were able to circumvent the anti-money laundering controls at US banks by transporting US dollars to Mexico and then using HSBC Mexico to transfer it to the US. HSBC didn't care. They just wanted to make as much money as possible from their Mexican branches. And this went on for years. So all of this went on for a long time. How did it ever all come crashing down for one of the biggest banks in the world? Enter Zhenli Yigon, or better known as El Chino in the narco world. He's a Chinese-Mexican businessman who ran a company in Mexico called Unimed. This was a wholesale pharmaceutical company that did business in Mexico. From 2002 to 2004, Unimed was legally authorized by the Mexican government to import thousands of tons of different chemicals into Mexico. This included precursor chemicals that cartels would need to make their newest product. So the cartels would get the ingredients they needed from Unimed. However, on July 1st, 2005, Unimed's license ran out, but Zhenli Yigon continued to import chemicals without a license. That's when police decided to raid his house in Mexico City. So in March of 2007, the Mexican government went to his house and made an insane discovery. They found over $200 million in cash. The cash was all over the place. There were just stacks and stacks of it everywhere. That's also when the police found out that he had been doing a lot of banking with HSBC. HSBC Mexico began to actually look into his records and found out that he had been banking with them for a long time. He was moving so much money that HSBC London, the bank's headquarters, began getting suspicious. They had given an order to its Mexican branch years ago in 2004 that they had to close his account, but that never happened. As we've said earlier, HSBC did have anti-money laundering systems in place. A bank usually has tight controls around all of its operations, but they just ignored it. For example, if someone tries to move $50,000 for the first time, the system will generate an alert. Usually someone at the bank will ask a few questions, but not at HSBC. The system at HSBC gave out plenty of these warnings, but it just seemed that no one cared enough to act on them. Billions of dollars were moved throughout HSBC, but ended up missing. And that means one thing only: it's money used to fund illegal activities. Because a bank can get into big trouble whenever they aid illegal activities through money laundering, it's in their best interest to get to know their customers. But HSBC never did that. It wasn't only El Chino that had these money laundering issues. It was a bunch of other people that were doing money laundering all over the US. Investigators noticed a lot of shady criminal transactions throughout different areas of the US. One particular thing they realized is that these transactions had triggered anti-money laundering alerts set in place at HSBC. One particular example was a doctor in West Virginia Dr. Barton Adams was essentially committing fraud with Medicaid and Medicare. He was stealing millions of dollars from these programs by seeking duplicate payments and billing for services not performed. He underreported his income with false tax returns, and then he laundered the money. HSBC moved all of his money around for him to his shell companies and never asked questions. These types of transactions were just the tip of the iceberg. HSBC was moving billions of dollars around for many criminal organizations and other corrupt businessmen. The OCC, or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, is a federal agency that's responsible for monitoring the bank system of the United States. After these money laundering problems were noticed at HSBC, the OCC sent a warning notice to them in 2010. Basically, the OCC let HSBC know that they uncovered some suspicious activity, and they're going to be looking closer at their activities. After receiving a warning from the OCC, HSBC was like, you know what? The OCC is right. We should start paying more attention to what's happening with our transactions. One of the things that the OCC told HSBC to do was to go back and look at its questionable transactions. So HSBC decided to create a special department to do that. HSBC hired a bunch of people. They were what HSBC called AML experts. These were anti-money laundering experts who were supposed to go through all of the HSBC backlogs and double-check for any missed alerts. Apparently, there were over 17,000 missed alerts. HSBC was basically forced to hire this team by the OCC, so HSBC did what any bank would do, and that's follow OCC's orders. HSBC hired as many of these auditors as possible, since they had a huge backlog of these missed alerts. So the hired AML experts actually started working their way through these missed system alerts. There's basically a blacklist of people and organizations that banks shouldn't be doing business with, called the OFAC sanctions list. What the AML experts found was that there were a ton of transactions involving a lot of people on the sanctions list. So if any individual or organization is on the list, transactions automatically don't go through. But how are these transactions approved and going through at the HSBC? HSBC used dashes and dots to hide the names of anyone on the list. Here's a silly example to help you understand how they did this. Let's say someone named John Smith was on this blacklist, and someone wants to send money to John Smith. Now, sending money to John Smith wouldn't be possible since he's on the list. So to get around this, HSBC would have the name in their list as Jo.HN Smith, or some other variation. Someone at HSBC would manipulate the spelling of the name in order to get around the system. After it became clear something was up, the CIA got involved. After further investigation, HSBC executives went in front of the Senate. So what happened? HSBC's attitude was along the lines of, we know what we did, let's get this over with and move on with life. We'll fix this sometime. HSBC admitted that these transactions did happen, but they said it wasn't their fault. Executives just pushed the blame down the line. Blame was pushed around everywhere, but everyone just said that they didn't know anything. In July of 2012, a US Senate committee issued a report that stated that the HSBC breached money laundering rules. Executives should have gone to jail. HSBC could have easily lost their US charter, something that would have been unprecedented. But instead, what happened? Nothing. No one was fined, no one was charged at the bank, just the bank itself was fined. HSBC and the US government settled in 2012. The United States attorney was actually forced to step down and drop any charges against the bank. With the settlement, HSBC was penalized $1.9 billion, the largest fine ever under the Bank Secrecy Act. That fine was for violating 4 US laws designed to protect the US financial system. That may sound like a lot of money, but $1.9 billion was only equivalent to 5 weeks of HSBC's profit in 2012. HSBC laundered at the very least $881 million in proceeds through the United States financial system for cartels. And these are just known transactions. The real number can easily be in the billions. They also failed to monitor more than $670 billion in wire transfers, and more than $9.4 billion in purchases of physical dollars from its Mexico unit. HSBC acknowledged that for years it had ignored warning signs that cartels in Mexico were using its branches to launder millions of dollars. But the US government didn't go hard after HSBC, even though they had determined HSBC helps to launder massive amounts of money for the cartels. The government had an opportunity to punish HSBC for their transgressions back in 2012, but they decided not to do it. No one knows why the government decided to not go after clear white-collar crime. They decided to do business with illegal organizations just so they can pocket billions of dollars in profit. This allowed cartels to operate in Mexico and the US with impunity. When HSBC bought Beetle Bank, It's our suspicion that they knew exactly what they were buying. They knew that the cartels were a growing business, and that specific business would grow. So they basically bought up these accounts and decided to continue to do business with them. And in order to continue to do business, they helped to hide cartel members and other criminal identities with a simple system of dots and dashes. The executives wanted the criminal business, and it's because it's a lot of money, and they were okay with whatever came with it. Even when they were caught, they still didn't care. They just put up some fake resistance just because the OCC told them to. They basically tried to hire as many incompetent auditors in order to show the OCC that they at least tried. But the auditors actually uncovered their simple little method that allowed transactions to go through. It's hard to think that HSBC executives had no clue what was going on and that they weren't in on this. During their public statement, their spokesperson added that a part of the bonuses for senior level executives would go towards paying the fine. Click to watch one of these next videos, and let us know in the comments whether or not you think drugs should be made legal.